him, he was not cleared. How many are familiar with the 27th chapter of Acts? I'm setting you back up because you probably don't remember it all. So he was not cleared of the charges, so he appealed directly to Caesar. Now he went right to the top. Like if somebody accused you of something and say, no, we're not going to clear you of charges. Say, you know what, I'm going to the president. He's going to clear me. And that's kind of what Paul did. He said, I'm going right to Caesar. I'm going to get this thing clear, because as long as he stood as an enemy to the Roman government, he was not going to be allowed any freedom. He was not going to be allowed to speak. So he felt the need to clarify his position, help them understand he was not speaking against Roman authority, and that he was just preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. So when he appealed to Caesar, it came time for him to be transferred from Caesarea ultimately to Rome, is where they were trying to bring him directly before Caesar. And he was placed under the care of the guard of a centurion named Julius. And you can pick up all of these things if you want to read. But Luke was on board also. Now, I don't know if you're familiar or remember that Luke is not an apostle, but he writes, we have some of his writings. In fact, Luke is a physician and he's a historian. And so Luke is who writes the book of Acts. And Luke was with Paul on this journey, which is interesting. When you read the 27th chapter of the book of Acts, you're going to hear the terms we frequently. And we is Luke and Paul and the rest of the people. So Luke was brought on as Paul's personal physician, and Luke journeyed with Paul to his ultimate destination. It was Luke who took the time to write down all of these events. And when you look at the detail that Luke took in precision in trying to document what happened, it actually is pretty interesting. I was driving up Friday, the wrestling team had to drive one of the vans. We were driving up to Alturas, and we're up in the hills, and most of the kids' phones stopped working. And I was laughing, and I told them 20 years ago, which doesn't seem like that long ago, 20 years ago when I was riding in vans to wrestling tournaments, there wasn't a single person in the van, including the coaches, who had a phone. Right. And they said, well, what did everybody do? They literally, one of the kids asked, there's a freshman. Freshmen are dumb. Sorry, Riley. He said, what did they do? I said, we talked to each other. It was different back then. So 2,000 years ago, though, Luke didn't have GPS on his phone, pull up, hey, where are we at? He didn't have, all the conveniences. He wasn't a ship navigator. And yet he took great detail in describing the events. And through his precision, you can kind of retract all that happened. And it's really interesting to think about how that in that time, in the midst of one of the greatest storms probably to hit that area, probably even since, it was an event, phenomenon that we'll read about in this chapter that is not common, but it happens. And he was able to, for 14 days where they didn't see the sun or the stars, to know where they were, to talk about that. It's really pretty interesting. So you can read all of those exact details. But a couple of things stood out to me about Luke before I get to Paul and the whole shipwreck. What a great man he was. We think about the Apostle Paul, and I think of the Apostle Paul very highly. How many of you have feel that same way? I'm sure we do. But I was thinking as I was reading this, what a great man Luke was. Luke is not considered to be an apostle or a disciple, and yet Luke puts his life in danger to travel with his brother in the faith who is physically ill. In fact, at one point, they stop at the beginning of the journey and they allow Paul to leave the boat for a period of time. Maybe, I don't know if it was exactly how much, but maybe a day or two. And he said he was able to be cared for by his friends and family. And so Luke puts his own life at risk to travel was somebody who he esteemed as important to the faith. And that is just an amazing sacrifice. When we think about Paul writing about how he was shipwrecked and he was beaten, all of the things that he discusses about his life, and yet I don't even think that we probably recognize the sacrifice that Luke made. That Luke was a part of this journey, and yet Luke really has no skin in the game. He's not writing, he's not establishing churches, he's not writing doctrine, and yet what a great man he was to do that. That really stood out to me. And what a great historian, as I mentioned, that he was able to be so precise. I want to pick up in the 9th verse, and we're just basically going to read down for the next 15 verses. And I'm going to get to some of the other things the next time I speak for the sake of time, for the sake of my own voice tonight, see how long it'll last. I want to just read, but before we do, let's ask the Lord to minister. Jesus, we come to you tonight, Lord, and we just want to understand more about you. We want to declare you. God, it's our desire that we would have the effect that you desire. And that is, Lord, that we would be more secure in our faith. I pray tonight that we would see your glory, God, even in this chapter, Lord, and that you would enable me to share what you have placed in my heart, Jesus, in your mighty name. And everybody say amen. Amen. So starting in the 9th verse, now when much time had been spent, and selling was now dangerous because the fast was already over, Paul advised them. Now they've already begun to sell, and as I said, they had let Paul off the boat and they began to sail again, but they had wasted too much time to really travel this course. And Paul advised them. Now Paul is a prisoner on this boat. He's not really one to be giving advice. He's not necessarily a sailor. He wasn't one of the fishermen who maybe had some sea experience. But Paul advised them, saying, men had perceived that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. And because the harbor was not suitable to winter in, the majority advised to set sail from there also, if by any means they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, opening toward the southwest and northwest, and winter there. So this was not a plan to immediately arrive at Rome. They understood that the conditions were poor, that they would not be able to make it, and so they didn't like the harbor they were in. I think it was like Fairhaven, I believe is where they were passing. Fairhaven Harbor, they didn't want to be there. They said this was open to the wrong direction and they didn't want to winter there. Now wintering there means they're going to be there a little bit. They didn't like the situation. They didn't feel like it was suitable for long-term stay. But Paul said, we need to stay put or we're going to be in trouble. And they said, but if we can make it to Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, opening toward the southwest and northwest, let's winter there. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their desire, putting out to sea, they sailed close by Crete. But not long after, a tempestuous headwind arose, called a Euroclydon. So when the ship was caught and could not head into the wind, we let her drive. I want to stop there. I think there's a lesson that we can pick up from just what we read. It's a pretty simple lesson, and it's not going to take too much imagination to grab a hold of it. And that is that we set our lives on certain courses with ideas and with visions about where we will end upon, about where the end result will be. I don't believe that any one of us set sail. If you want to look at life in that way, as though we're sailing toward an end goal, I don't believe that any one of us set sail proposing that disaster will be the outcome of our life. Amen? And we have visions and we have ideas about how we're going to get there. and we become so focused upon trying to make this happen that there are times in our lives where we neglect and disregard good counsel. It's not uncommon. And I know this may be preaching to the choir, but I don't think that this is just something that happens only to worldly people. I don't think this is just something that happens to young Christians. I think that in our lives, it's very easy for us to become so purpose-driven about where we think we're going that we have a difficult time hearing any voice that proposes something different. You know, one of the issues that should stand out to us is that when we just think for a moment, how many times in your month do you attend a service in which you desire to pay little to no attention, or you feel like that this really doesn't apply, or I've got other things to do? Those are just simple clues in our lives. I'm not saying this to condemn. I'm saying those are simple positions in our lives that prove to us our single-focusedness, that we are focused singularly. I know of myself, and I know this is true of every one of you, so I don't make a stunning indictment, but I know of myself that when I sit in church, that I have to battle with my mind to keep it on track. How many say amen? Amen. Some of you just woke up right when I said that. I have to battle because while I am sitting there, Pastor has documented this, and I'm thankful that he does, because it makes me feel like I'm human. And that it's okay, because everybody struggles. Because when we kneel down to pray, that we start remembering everything else. And when we come to church, we can think of all the things we forgot. And it's perfect time to plan out your week. You come to church Sunday night, it's the perfect time. I got to do this tomorrow, and then Tuesday, I got to do that. And boy, man, halfway through, Pastor Rodney's almost done. This is awesome. Only have to catch the last 15, and we're good. And that's not an indictment against us as much as it is the truth about our nature. And we understand, I don't even think it's always a sin nature or a bad nature. It's just the fact that we struggle to accept the focus of the Lord in our lives, because we deal much better in the natural and in the practical than we do in the supernatural. How many say amen to that? I just deal a lot better with things I can touch and things I can see. I can deal with hammers and nails. I can deal with concrete. That's my profession. And so I can deal with those things a lot better than I can saying, Lord, what is it that you want for my life? Not that I don't want to ask him that. I do ask him that. But oftentimes his answers aren't hammers and nails and concrete. His answers are spiritual of nature, and they're difficult for me to grab hold of. So it's easier for me to focus on things that are going to transpire and happen without my assistance, and that's just getting up and going to work. I don't have to do a whole lot to do that. It's easier for me to focus on that and neglect the things that I must labor over, which are spiritual. We are without any effort fleshly. How many say amen to that? I don't have to make any effort to wake up tomorrow and operate fully in the flesh. Right. I don't have to do anything. All I have to do is get out of bed. Right. And everything I do just naturally will be in the flesh. But I have to labor. The scripture says that we should labor so that we can enter into his rest. And so it's a labor in our lives to do things which are spiritual. And when we get so focused on the natural, it becomes difficult for us to hear other voices. And I know this, and I don't say this to try to prop up any specific person, a pastor or one of our teachers, but I say this because when we get focused on what we're trying to accomplish, we can see our pastors, we can see our godly counselors, our mentors in the faith, and there's a lot of them in this body, that each of us have multiple people in this body that we look up to and we see as godly counsel. But when we get focused on the natural, we can tend to see them as an enemy of what we're trying to accomplish. Not that we look at them and are completely ungrateful, but the voice of reason that comes from outside the sphere that we live in becomes an obstacle to our desire. And when we have an obstacle to our desire, we become more comfortable with voices that say the same thing. So what we tend to do is when we get set on a direction, and the Apostle Paul says, that's not the direction, we get around us enough people to sway our opinion. So the guard, he says, he listened, the centurion listened not just to the helmsman, not just to the owner. He said they were persuading him, but he said he listened to the majority. And what you'll do when you have a direction set in your life and you really want to accomplish it is you'll surround yourself with the people who will tell you, yes, do it. And you'll eliminate from your life the people who will tell you, no, don't. And oftentimes the people that will tell you, no, don't, are your friends more than the people who are telling you, yes, do. It's the truth. It's the truth. These men should have known. Now, obviously, Paul has a spiritual nature. He says, I perceive that this is going to happen. But it was clear that they were already sailing in a time of the year in which it was dangerous. This storm didn't come out of the middle of nowhere in the summer. This is the time of winter where ships should not be at sea. They already knew the time was past, but they didn't like the position they were in. They were looking at where they would be forced to stay, and they were uncomfortable with that situation. And so they said, I don't want to stay here. Anywhere is better than here. That's a really bad place to be in our lives. It's a really bad place to be in our lives when we look at our surroundings and our situations and we say, anywhere is better than here. I'm willing to take a risk of my life in order to provide for myself more comfort. Right. That's what they said in this case. When we look at our lives spiritually, how much are we willing to risk of our spiritual lives to provide for ourselves a situation in which our ears are tickled or our fancies are tickled, where we provide for ourselves more of what we want, more comfort, more finances? How much are we willing to sacrifice? That's a real question, I think, that we have to learn from this. I think there's some good things we can see right here in the leading up to this shipwreck. What do you think? There are some battles that are worth fighting. And there are some storms that we have to set sail through in order to arrive at the purpose of God. I'm telling you right now that as you sail on the sea of life, that you're going to find yourself in storms from time to time. Amen? There were times where Jesus told his disciples, go to the other side, and a storm arose while there. Jesus told them to go. And in order to get where God wanted them to be, they had to go right through the middle of the storm. But Jesus calmed the storm because he had told them to go. So there are times that you're going to have to set sail and go through storms. But there are also times where God says don't sail, and you set sail on your own, and you'll find yourselves in storms that are far worse than you expected and with no help on the way. I don't want us to be afraid of storms. I don't want us to fear what might be. But we should be afraid about venturing into waters that are unknown without the purpose of God in our lives, without godly counsel, without the Word of God, without those who care about us and understand our situation trying to help us. See, I believe tonight what I'm trying to say is not about control. I don't want to control anybody. God knows I don't. We know a lot of preachers, and in fact, Dad and I were acquainted with a different denomination pastor, and it's all about control. He controls everywhere everybody goes, and when they vacation, and where they work. And in fact, from what I understand, if they have a phone, then he has to have full access to their phone. And man, I don't want that. I don't want anything to do with any of that. I don't even want to be the person who you call. I'm fine being the person you don't call. But I'm telling you this, God puts people in our lives so we can have accountability. God puts checks and balances in our lives. And it's for good cause. And we should value them. And I'm not saying because I'm associate pastor, I don't want to be that unless God puts that in your heart to allow that. I want for my own life checks and balances. I want to find people that I can trust that will speak good counsel into my life, that will not just say, yeah, Rodney, go do it because, I love you and I don't want to hurt your feelings. I don't need those kind of people to counsel me. I don't need those kind of people to preach to me. The problem in our churches today, the problem that we deal with most in America, is that preachers have become friends instead of pastors. Right. The preachers have been more concerned with standing up and saying things that will please people. And I know that's common, and we all know that, but it's the truth. The problem is that when people are sailing out into seas they should not, preachers would rather get up and say, hey, you're okay, and you're going to make it. Instead of saying there's a waterfall up ahead, and you should get out of the boat. Get out of the boat. Get on the land. But that's a fear. So there's some things that God wants us to go through. Difficulty is knowing the difference between the storms that God has sent us through and the storms that are of our own choosing. That's a difficult thing to know. How many have gone through some storms in your life? How many wondered in those storms, is this a result of my sin, of my failure, of my disobedience, or is this just a trial of life? Anybody wondered that? It's natural. It's difficult for us to ascertain which is the case when we're going through a storm in our lives. I think for us, the easiest application to understanding this, though, the simplest thing is just to simply start with, did this journey begin in obedience or in disobedience? Right. If my journey began in obedience, then I'm going through this and Jesus is with me. Yeah. If my journey began in disobedience, then I'm walking to the helm of my own ship. And I've cut the ties loose from the dock, and I've said I'm sailing the seas, and I'm going to get to somewhere. And that is a journey I've done on my own. The truth is, when we trample under the counsel of the Lord, when we trample under the preaching of the Word, when we trample under the scriptures that we are reading, and I don't think that we do that lightly, but if we do that, if that's the case, then we are headed for shipwreck in our lives. Yeah. It's just the truth. When we refuse to allow the Word of God to speak to us, when we stand up, as James said, and we look in the mirror, and we see that we are undone, and we see that our hair is a mess, that I don't have the appropriate amount of makeup on, which for me is 0, but for some of you is a lot. And we see that we are unkept. We see that we're not in the condition that we should be by the Word of God, and we do nothing about it. James says we're fools, and we are deceiving ourselves. When we stand up and look at the Word of God, and we don't allow it to be the guide for our ship, and we take a hold of the wheel, we are headed for shipwreck in our lives. Come on. The apostle had warned them not to go, but they didn't like the harbor. A harbor is safety. A harbor is a place to dock and a place in which, when you're in a storm, if there's a great storm on the ocean, we had the opportunity to go through a wind event several years ago in the dunes on Winchester Bay. And some of you were up there. It was rough. It busted up most of what we had, and after that we were supposed to be there like 2 more days, I think it was, and we got up first thing in the morning, loaded up our stuff, and went home. That was it. We're done. It was scary. I remember Carrie made me get the kids. We had that little trailer, that enclosed trailer that's our work trailer, and I built a little bunk. And Carrie made me get the kids out of the bunk and put them down in the lower part. She was certain that trailer was going to blow over, and I wasn't uncertain it was. I was trying to hold together that it wasn't, but I wasn't positive. In fact, I wasn't sure it wasn't going to just peel that metal siding off that thing. Right. The wind was pouring through it, and it was scaring me. And I'm telling you, that was one of the more frightening nights I've spent in any kind of